welcome to this week's episode of this Healthy Life podcast. I'm so excited for my guests today. I have two wonderful guests. I have Candice and Debbie, and the two of them have joined forces to be the two alpha gals, and they're chronicling their journey with alpha gal syndrome, which they're going to be sharing about today. And they also have some great work advocating for a nonprofit that they've started and also getting policy solutions in the alpha gal community. So welcome, Debbie and Candice. So glad to have you today.
Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Erica.
Awesome. So I'd love to start with an introduction about yourself. And before we kind of dive into even that, I want you to share a little bit about exactly what alpha gal is, because I think there's going to be a lot of people out there listening that, are familiar with it, might even be struggling it with them on their own, but also a lot of other people that are like, what is that? Like, I've never heard of that. Like, what does this even mean? So let's maybe start with a brief kind of intro on alpha gal, and then I'd love to hear both of your journeys dealing with it as well.
Sure. So alpha gal syndrome, in a nutshell, is often referred to as the red meat allergy that you catch from getting bitten by a Lone Star tick, in this country anyway. But what Candice and I have learned is that it's really so much more than that. You get bit by this tick, it makes you allergic to the presence of galactose alpha-1,3 galactose, which is a sugar that is found in all mammals except for humans and some primates. And so what happens is that you develop this allergic reaction to anything that contains that sugar, which is anything that comes from a mammal. It could be meat, it could be mammal byproducts such as dairy, or to things that are used in pharmaceuticals and home and healthcare and beauty products. It's really everywhere.
Wow. Okay. And so the only way to get it is from the Lone Star tick, right? There's not really any other way to get alpha gal. Is that right?
That is the way that we know you can get it now, although we believe that there's some research going on in other ways that you can contract it. But for now, it's from the Lone Star tick, and there's a handful of other ticks across the world that can actually give it to you. It's known as different things on other continents. So a lot of places have sort of a similar red meat allergy. So lots of research being done on that front.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, I'd love to hear about both of your journey, dealing with it. Like, how long have you been dealing with it, and what has been this journey like for you?
Okay. So I'm going to start because I guess synchronistically, like everything kind of snowballed after my really severe reaction. So Debbie and I met back in 2017. So we were very, very new friends. But even prior to that, we did not know each other. So in 2007, I was actually bitten by a tick when I was pregnant with my daughter. And I ended up developing a wheat allergy about 6 months after that. So I had terrible GI issues. I broke out in hives. I was just ebbing and flowing, with fatigue and not feeling well. And fast forward, so I went gluten-free, started feeling better for years. And then in 2018, not long after I met Debbie, I actually sought out the help of a functional medicine practitioner, and I was put on 11 different supplements. All of them contain gelatin or some form of bovine or porcine ingredients. 5 days into that regimen, I woke up to the room spinning, seeing double, my heart racing. I know now that what I experienced was an anaphylactic reaction, but because I didn't have hives or swelling, I did not recognize it, and neither did any of the practitioners, ER doctors, cardiologists, PCP. No one recognized it for months. So when I was acutely ill, I literally went from being very active to couch bound overnight, and I had to get really vulnerable. And I just had this connection with Debbie, even as a new friend. And I asked her to come babysit me. And while my husband was at work, I said, can you please, I need help. I can't get off the couch to go to the bathroom. And so she graciously came every single time I called. And so about, 3 months into all of this very severe, these severe reactions, I ended up at UVA, the University of Virginia. Thankfully, that is where the founding immunologist practiced, who founded alpha-gal syndrome. And I left with the diagnosis of alpha-gal, and I called Debbie and I said, you're never going to believe this. Everything I've been taking has been slowly killing me. And so then I learned that Debbie was also dealing with symptoms, although Deb, I'll let you pick up there.
Yeah. So my symptoms like so many other people living with alpha-gal, my symptoms looked so different from Candice's. Mine started around the same time as her, again, 10 years before we'd met, 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. But my major symptom was joint pain. So I thought I was, I was this 30-year-old in the body of a 90-year-old, not being able to get off the sofa or the bed or lean on in certain ways to read my toddlers books. It was really a challenging time for me. And then other symptoms started to creep in. I had a lot of GI symptoms. The brain fog was a big one. And what would happen is I would feel sick and I would go to my doctor and I would see a series of specialists who would all tell me that I was fine and I was okay and there was nothing wrong with me. And when you hear that enough, you start to believe that the problem is you. I'm sure you experienced that some with your own health journey, and it's really hard. And then I would go back and try to live with it until it got too bad again. And then I would start the whole process over again. So I did that for 10 years or so. And then after the experience with Candice, and she called me and told me it was alpha-gal, I said, I have so many of these same symptoms and I've made this connection with red meat that it makes me sick. And so I went and insisted on being tested. And sure enough, my test came back positive. So we knew that, being these new friends and being diagnosed so soon with something that we believed was really rare at the time, that we were really set out on this mission to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you guys met and found each other. Now, I'm not glad that you met under those circumstances, but I always say, like, some of the friends I've met on my Lyme journey, I'm like, that's the only good thing that's come from this journey, is like meeting you and creating these really amazing friendships. So I'm glad that you at least had each other's support through kind of navigating this, especially early on. So let's talk a little bit about the symptoms. So you guys both sounded like you have very varying symptoms. You had kind of like more like overreactive anaphylactic reaction. You were having more kind of like almost classic tick-borne disease symptoms, right? Like the joint pain and the neuro and the brain fog. Did yours ever escalate to also be having those anaphylactic reactions? Or is that something that happens in every case? Or is that everyone just have like a very different subset of symptoms that they can experience with alpha-gal?
It's not something that happens in every case, but it happens in a lot of cases. And mine has escalated to anaphylaxis. So I'm extremely anaphylactic, especially to dairy. For some reason, that's one of the things that gets me every time. So even though I'm maybe not as sensitive as Candice is, and this is sort of this spectrum of alpha-gal, like we're learning, like there's the spectrum of most of these tick-borne diseases, right? Candice is super sensitive. She reacts to any tiny amount of any of these things and it spirals into anaphylaxis. I'm not necessarily quite as reactive. I don't react to sugar or carrageenan or some of these other things that some of the community reacts to. But when I do react, it's using my EpiPen. It's full anaphylaxis.
Wow. Yeah. And I'll add, Erica, sorry, I'll add, that the thing with alpha-gal is that the reactions are typically delayed. So say you eat steak dinner with a baked potato and butter and sour cream and things that are very heavily mammal derived, and you wake up at midnight or 1 a.m. with GI distress, covered in hives, or this overwhelming sense of impending doom, your blood pressure falling, feeling lightheaded. That is classic. It's a classic representation, I guess, of alpha-gal. And, but it makes it hard to diagnose because when you go to the ER, the provider's going to ask, what did you just eat? So it looks very different than your normal food allergy. So that, the delayed onset makes it pretty tricky for diagnosis.
And is that pretty consistent with most people, that it ends up being more of a delayed reaction versus a really sudden, quick reaction to exposure?
Well, the truth is that we hear about the wide range. For instance, some of us experience fume reactions. Candice and I both experience fume reactions. So there's no walking into a burger joint or a steak restaurant for us.
I've heard about this. Yeah, that people can even react to it just from smelling it and go into an anaphylactic reaction. Like, it has to be so scary because, like, you're outside, your neighbor's grilling and you have no control over that. And all of a sudden you're like, I can die just from being out here. Like, it's just so insane, like how sensitive it makes you and how reactive you can be to it.
It's crazy. Yeah. And so, those reactions can happen immediately. And, we just try to approach everything just being aware rather than living in fear, but being aware of how close you are to those things that you're smelling. And are you going to be within distance of actually inhaling, these aerosolized meat particles, essentially. But we do hear a whole lot about the delayed reaction. Everybody says something different. Any 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours later, we experience that ourselves. Dairy, it's 3 hours for me on the dot if I've been exposed. But it does seem like there's a very wide range still, anything from immediate to 12 hours later.
Mm-hmm. And then, so what are kind of some tactics or tools in your toolkit that you use to navigate this? Because, I myself am celiac, and no matter how diligent and how careful I am and how much I communicate that I'm sensitive to gluten, cross contamination will make me sick, it still gets the best of me. I still get accidentally glutened, more often than I would like, is the reality. So I'm just wondering, what are some things that you can do? Because if you're reacting to dairy, you're reacting to gelatin, maybe even the fats from the animals and things like that, how do you navigate, going out to eat and working around this without being sick?
Yeah. So, I think what Debbie said, the biggest thing is being prepared. We don't want to live in fear, but I think preparation is key. It does make us have to do a lot of legwork up front of calling restaurants, of investigating, is the kitchen away from the dining room? If they do cook mammal, you do have to just kind of assess where you're going to go ahead of time. But we also have our toolkit. We always tell people, have your toolkit in place. And what we mean by that is talk to your provider about, safe antihistamines for you, what they recommend based off of your unique situation. Have 2 EpiPens on your person at all time. Do not leave them in the hot car. Don't leave them in extreme cold or hot temperatures, and always carry 2, not just 1. So really setting those emergency, preparations in place ahead of time. Have your first responder. All of these things I think allow us to navigate this and feel more secure. Debbie, do you have anything else to add?
No, you did a beautiful job.
And then, so speaking of the EpiPens, you mentioned antihistamines and things like that. If you do have an accidental exposure, what's kind of the protocol, or what do you do? Are you able to maybe take some antihistamines and that calms your system enough that you don't have to go so extreme to use the EpiPen? Or if you're exposed, you're like, I have to use the EpiPen, and how often does that happen?
So, as you know, it happens on occasion. We wish it didn't. We wish people were more vigilant. We wish there wasn't so much risk out there, but unfortunately it is. So we do have these plans in place that we've established with our personal healthcare providers. For me, it's taking an H1 blocker and an H2 blocker, and then I assess the situation. And if my symptoms aren't resolving, then I use my EpiPen. And then 1 hour later, if I get any sort of rebound, I'm using my second EpiPen and going to the hospital. So everybody's is going to be a little bit different. And a lot of people don't reach that EpiPen point. Candice and I are pretty good at assessing our reactions at this point. They're always scary, right? They're always scary regardless of how prepared you are. But we can sort of assess, and we know what our body's reactions seem to be. And when we face these reactions, so that we do know, okay, my antihistamines aren't enough right now. I definitely need to use the EpiPen. This is not something I want to mess around with. Mm-hmm. And I think the statistics are that something like 60 to 75% of people with alpha-gal do experience anaphylaxis. So it is a huge number of us that are facing this extreme reaction versus just having, just getting to take a Benadryl or an Allegra and be done with it.
And I'm just going to add to that, Erica, we can send you, there's a great flyer from FAIR, the Food Allergy Research and Education organization, that they have put out about anaphylaxis and how to educate yourself on what that looks like and when epinephrine is, necessary. So we learned, this was something we didn't know early on, that if 2 or more systems are in play. So for example, if you feel that overwhelming sense of impending doom and you have GI distress, or you're breaking out in hives and you're having GI distress, 2 or more systems in play warrants the use of epinephrine. For me, my blood pressure drops. So I have a blood pressure cuff that I keep in my purse that goes around my wrist. And so I assess those things based off of, past experiences. And so it's critical for people to learn what their reactions are. and kind of, develop that plan accordingly around that. But we talk to so many people that have no idea that especially that sense of impending doom is actually, it can mimic anxiety. I know Debbie and I were both dismissed in that way at some point in this journey. And so just understanding, the signs and the symptoms really
And it
of
has to be
anaphylaxis.
scary too, because especially since most of them tend to be a kind of a more delayed reaction, right? You can think
Right.
that you went out to eat and you're fine, and all of a sudden 3, 4, 6 hours later, you're having these feelings and you're like trying to go to bed,
Mm-hmm.
or something different, and you don't know what's happening. So wow, yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot to
Yeah.
manage. And so as far as lifestyle, obviously diet, making sure you're kind of keeping up with diet. And then you mentioned like H1, H2 blockers. Is that something that you just kind of take every day consistently to kind of keep your body at a low histamine baseline, or do you just take those as needed if you've been exposed? Or is there anything you can kind of do to manage the day to day and keep yourself healthy?
Well, that would definitely be something to talk to your allergist about. To give you an example, I do take Allegra every day to sort of keep my allergic reaction at at a steady state. So I do take that every day, but not everybody needs to. My daughter actually has alpha gal also, and she doesn't need to take it. She's not nearly as allergic to things as I am. She can even still consume dairy. So there's this wide range of what people are allergic to. So it really does look different, which I think is part of why it's another reason why it's so hard to diagnose, right? Is
Yeah.
that it can look like Lyme, it can look like arthritis, it can look like Alzheimer's, it can look like all these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And
so someone, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I've added quercetin to my daily routine. I do take antihistamines. I also do H1, H2 blockers, but I don't do them every single day unless it's really high grass season, because I also am really allergic to grass. So I think, Debbie and I both have learned what our histamine bucket threshold is. So we try to really be aware of that in our day-to-day life, which also includes food and, keeping it, just our histamines not freaking out any more than they already do.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's a big overlap with even like mast cell activation, right? Which is so
Yep.
common, unfortunately, with people with like tick-borne disease and things like that. And it's like just kind of like adding on like another layer of revving that whole side of your body up and causing more symptoms. So if someone suspects that they have symptoms, right? Like say they're feeling like they're overreactive or their allergies are a little weird, or like you mentioned, like I didn't feel good when I ate meat. Like what are some things that they can do? Like you said, you were dismissed by so many practitioners. What's kind of a good resource to go to find a practitioner that's going to take them seriously? And what sort of testing can they do to rule out alpha gal if that could be something that they're dealing with? That's a lot of questions at once.
We would definitely recommend going to alphagalinformation.org. Our dear friend Sharon started this website with one of the top researchers, Dr. Scott Cummins at UNC, back in 2019. And it is an amazing resource, just tons of publications, medical, articles. She really has done her due diligence in finding the truest information regarding alpha-gal. So along those lines, also, there's a whole page on diagnostics and testing, test codes for LabCorp and Quest, and everything that you would need to go bring to your doctor if you suspect this. It is a simple blood test. It's not a panel. It's unfortunately not included in the tick-borne disease panel. So it would have to be added alongside that. But we have found that most insurances cover it. We've actually never been told by anyone that it's not covered by insurance. So I would be shocked if that was the case. So definitely that would be my first go-to. Deb, do you have any other?
Yes, it really truly is the most comprehensive resource that's out there. If you're looking for something about alpha-gal, any kind of information, it's likely going to be at alphagalinformation.org. So we highly recommend it. Yeah.
Awesome.
And
We'll
it,
link to that
I
in the
think,
show notes too.
oh yeah, that would be great if you can add that.
Absolutely.
And it's important to note here, I think, that if you are experiencing symptoms of alpha-gal syndrome, just like any other condition, if you're experiencing symptoms, we all have the right to good, compassionate health care, right? And so don't be afraid to go and ask for it. If you've noticed you have a delayed reaction after you eat, or if you've noticed that you get these allergic responses and you don't know what they're linked to, it's okay to go in and ask for this test.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then, so I want to talk a little bit about other products. So you mentioned, dairy, anything coming from a mammal, but you said that even like body care products and, medications and pharmaceuticals. What are some hidden places that you've been, had a reaction to products or had a reaction to foods that aren't necessarily like, you're like, oh, I can avoid a steak, I can avoid meat. But what are some of these hidden places that, people need to be aware of and look out for if they are dealing with alpha-gal?
Yeah, so there are so many hidden sources. It's really hidden everywhere, unfortunately. But our rule is that you have to check everything that you put in, on, or around your body. So some of the sort of more shocking places we've found mammal has been in toilet paper and in wine and in toothpaste. And we had this really crazy incident where we stumbled across the fact that refining white sugar, sometimes they use bone char. And so not all white sugar is safe for some of our community.
Wow.
So
my mind is blown right now. Wine, toilet paper, and sugar.
Yes. And even maple syrup, we learned that there's a defoaming agent that is often used. So we came across that on vegan.org's website because they have an amazing list of certified vegan products. And we were like, maple syrup? Oh my gosh.
You're like, what? That's wild.
So yeah,
it's
everywhere, unfortunately.
So do you have to, if you do buy products, you have to make sure that you're buying everything that says it's vegan, just to make sure that you're kind of avoiding those animal products. And then what about like any sort of like hint or cross-contamination? Because I know with like gluten, right, if a product says it's gluten-free, it can still have 20 parts per million, but I still react to that. So even though it's technically legally gluten-free, it still has a little bit. And I don't know what the regulations are with like vegan products. Like, do they have to be completely 100% animal free, or can they have trace amounts from like one of these agents that they use to, process things? Like it's kind of wild, right?
That's the really hard part. I don't think we ever, unfortunately, in the way that our manufacturing is and our laws at this point for labeling, they don't have to label the fining or processing agents. Like, for example, gelatin can be added into chicken, carrageenan, which is a red algae, but it contains the alpha-gal epitope. So it's not a mammal, but chemically, I guess structurally, it has the same makeup. And I am severely allergic to carrageenan. Debbie's is not, but it's one of the only things that makes my tongue swell. But it can be added into fish that is frozen. So there's a lot of sneaky ways that it can be, put into our food. And, manufacturing wise, I think when we were at the Fair Summit several years ago, there's only a handful of actually truly allergen-free manufacturers in this country. And I think I think they do have standards of having to clean and all of this prior to having a certified vegan product. But I don't think they're tested the way that even gluten, is for celiac. So there's always kind of a risk. I think we've just learned how to read labels, and you kind of do have to be your own detective, where if I see a chocolate bar, for example, that says may contain dairy, that's out for me.
Yeah, that's how I am with weed. If it says may contain weed or made in a facility with weed, I'm just like, it's not even worth my time because I'm probably going to get sick.
Right.
So it's like that. You just have to weigh out kind of that risk, do that risk assessment to see, because there's just really no straightforward answer, unfortunately.
No, it's just about mitigating risk. Yeah. And finding things that are plant-based or vegan helps a lot with that. It knocks a whole bunch of things down right from the get-go. So that's usually where we start. But, there's not a vegan label on most toilet paper, even though,
So how common is that? Is the toilet paper like a really big thing, or is it just like one fluke brand, or is it pretty common?
I think it's pretty common, actually, because they use their ingredients like lanolin and things like that, that we've never had to think about before, but that comes from sheep's wool. And so that's an immediate trigger. We're always surprised by how many people are getting irritated by toilet paper.
Oh my gosh. So do you have to carry your own toilet paper too?
Sometimes.
Oh my goodness.
It depends.
You guys must have a big purse. Wow,
Yeah.
that's a lot. That is a lot.
Mhm.
So as far as diet goes, like what kind of diets do you mostly follow? Do you stick to kind of a more plant-based because that's safer, or do you dabble in like fish and chicken and just be mindful of getting things that don't have some of these added ingredients that might cause a reaction? Or what's your kind of day-to-day diet look like?
Yeah, so I went completely plant-based about 3 years ago. I've slowly started to add some emu into my diet just because I had really low iron. And I've also eaten some fresh fish if I'm at the coast. I just am very particular, because I was reacting to chicken and eggs and even fish from the grocery store. And I think it was because of these additives that were not labeled. And I was having terrible anaphylaxis every week for 6 weeks and was having to go to the ER. And I started listening to a lot of podcasts and doing a lot of research on plant-based athletes. I was like the big paleo girl. So for years, I was like, I can't get protein eating a plant-based diet. I did that whole thing. And then my husband was like, I'll do it with you. Like, let's just do it for 2 weeks. And I did. And all of my reactions stopped. So I was like, So I've just kept doing it. And, now 3 years in, I'm kind of adding things as my body needs them. There's a great emu farm in North Carolina, so not too far from where we are. So that's been good to add back in. I mean, I could tell that I needed it. So, but yeah, mainly plant-based.
And I actually went plant-based about 1.5 years ago. So it was actually my husband's idea. I just was continuing to react to something. And then he got on board with the whole plant-based athlete thing. And we watched a documentary and he's like, I think I'm going to try it. And I was like, well, it's not that far of a stretch for me to just those last few things. So we've been completely plant-based, though we've also just this summer started adding back in some fish. Like Candice said, if we can get it fresh, and we have a great resource for getting fresh fish here in town that comes straight from the coast. So we'll do that on occasion.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then, so are there any treatments or anything that you can do, or do you eventually, does this reverse itself or heal, or once you have it, is this kind of a lifelong thing that you have to just manage? Has anyone been able to kind of turn it around and, turn down the reactions a little bit and be able to eat meat again or be around meat?
Like what Debbie said, there's such a range of severity with this. And I don't know, this is my own speculation. I also have an autoimmune disease. So I think that it puts me in more of a severe category. Like I said, I think I've had this since 2007. From 2007 to 18, I just had GI issues. And then I was rebitten by something I never saw the second tick. And then it became anaphylactic. So this is the thing that is a little tricky with alpha-gal is we do hear people go into remission. They can 5 to 7 years after their initial diagnosis. They don't know why people do. But I think there's always the risk if you're rebitten that things can resurface.
Or escalate even, right?
What's that?
Yeah. Or escalate, kind of double up and get worse.
Yeah, that's actually a major warning for people living with alpha-gal is do not get bit by another Lone Star tick, because if your symptoms are mild, you can go to anaphylaxis just with another bite. So
yeah.
So I think it's just avoidance of tick bites. There is kind of a controversial treatment option. We get asked about this a lot. There's an articular acupuncture treatment called SAAT. We've heard it's helped people, lessen their reactivity. Unfortunately, we've also heard that some practitioners say that it's a cure. But again, with what we just said, the majority of people never see the tick that bit them. So we just tell people, proceed cautiously with that. And, we have also unfortunately heard of it making symptoms worse. So, we're all about, alternative treatments and trying different things. We've done it ourselves but just do your due diligence before trying anything new.
Yeah. It's definitely not something you want to mess with and make worse, because it's already such a slippery slope to manage.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all this. It's a lot. It's a lot
Yeah.
to deal with, but I'm glad you guys have each other and have found ways to kind of navigate it, you know?
Yeah, that
Um,
helps. Yeah, I
yeah.
think it's really important for us to show people that, yeah, it is a lot, but there's a way to live with this and still have a really great, wonderful, joyful life. And so we're trying to do that on our own, but we're also trying to
Hmm.
show other people how to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to switch gears a little bit. So you guys also recently launched a nonprofit, the Alpha Gal Foundation. So can you share a little bit about that and what that looks like and what some of your goals are with that?
Yes. And so we are so excited about the Alpha Gal Foundation. We've been working the last 5 years as two Alpha Gals, but we really wanted to broaden our reach. This past winter, we stepped into the legislative space a little bit and we helped pass the bill in Virginia that made Alpha Gal actually a mandatory reportable disease in the state of Virginia. So it's required to be reported to the CDC effective next year. Which will really give us a better picture of what we're looking at as far as the prevalence of alpha-gal goes in the state. It's already been passed in Arkansas, so this is happening at the state level. But then, additionally, there is now a federal bill that was introduced by Representative Andrew out of New Jersey that would add alpha-gal to the list of major allergens. So this is really big. This is at the federal level. Yeah, and so what that would mean is that it would be required for alpha-gal to be labeled on most packaged foods. I know you're probably very familiar with the package labeling that says, milk or wheat or any of these top 9 allergies, but the CDC is telling us as of last year that alpha-gal is the 10th most common allergen. And so we are hoping to use the platform of our nonprofit to really push forward these goals with legislation and having a broader reach and having a seat at the table at some of the things that we weren't necessarily a part of as a for-profit business.
Hmm. Awesome. Yeah, that's amazing that you've been able to get the policy changed for Virginia. Hopefully that follows suit in all states, right? And at
We're
the federal level as
hoping.
well. Yeah, it's so hard to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
people to acknowledge these horrible tick-borne diseases that, are just growing exponentially. And I mean, especially in your area, because I know it's mostly from the Lone Star tick, right? Which is all kind of like the Southeast area. So like Texas, the Southeast, they're all, really struggling with it. And I'm sure very underdiagnosed, very underreported. And people are wondering what's going on. And so this will just give more visibility to that.
We're
And
hoping.
yeah, that's amazing. And then, so you also have a food allergy mentorship program that you guys created as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that and how you're working with people and helping people on their journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, after our own diagnosis, we had to do so much research that, it's so overwhelming. Just like you heard, it's alpha gal is in everything. Mammal is in everything. So we really wanted to bridge that gap between healthcare and human care. How can we help ease the overwhelm for others that are diagnosed with this? I had been navigating a wheat, barley, sesame, and rye allergy for years prior to this diagnosis. So I knew that I had to do a deeper dive. Debbie also has dealt with other allergies. So we were kind of a step ahead, when we received this diagnosis, but so many people are not. And like you were saying, if you live in a rural area or, just underserved communities, like you may not have the support or, the knowledge to ask certain questions or self advocate. So we really built out this program to tackle the main foundational components, like, going through your food, your products, but also, like I said, self advocacy, self compassion. We're huge mental health proponents. So we have that as a part of our program as well, talking to family, friends, providers, and then, we go into some fun stuff kind of toward the end of talking about travel and going out to eat and, navigating getting back outside and all of those things. So, we built two alpha gals on our pillars from moving, from survival into reinvention, resilience, and joy. So that's kind of was the premise for how we built out our mentorship program as well. And we work with people 2-on-1 for 6 weeks and meet them where they are. Some people don't necessarily need to do a pantry clean out, so we meet people where they're at with the challenges that they're having with this diagnosis.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah, it's great that you guys are so giving with kind of your knowledge and experience that you've learned along the way and being able to help others because, that's kind of like one question I had next is, what's like the number one tip that you can share with someone when they first get diagnosed or, are starting this journey or maybe like the top 3 tips because there's probably a lot that's going through your mind, right? Kind of like, I remember when I first got diagnosed with celiac disease, at first I was almost kind of in denial. I was like, oh, I'm not going to be that sensitive. I'm not going to react that much. So, I kept my old cookware, I kept my old strainers and like wood spoons, and I just felt horrible. And I was just like getting sick. And it wasn't until I realized like how sensitive I was and how I was reacting to all these things that I really had to do like a major pantry clean out and get new cookware and get new wooden spoons and like all these porous areas where I'd been cooking with gluten for years, right? So it's like kind of a shock at first. So anything that you can do to kind of buffer that for people and kind of be like, look, I know it sounds extreme, but you're going to feel better. Just kind of clearing this out and, doing it right from the start instead of kind of suffering for all those months of being in denial and trying to drag this out. So I'm sure it's probably similar, a little different, obviously with Alpha Gal, but probably a little bit of a simpler experience. So what are some kind of top 3 recommendations for people out there that are starting on their journey?
Oh, there are so many. I think one of my very first ones, and I think they sort of rotate which one I would list first, and hopefully Candice will jump in here too. But I think one of my very first recommendations for somebody if they're newly diagnosed would be to find your first responder. So you said something that reminded me of this, and that Candice and I have had each other going through this, and that has been hugely helpful. But one of the things we hear the most from people, especially in the Food Allergy Mentorship Program, is they say, I'm so lonely, right? Because this allergy is a huge percentage of this allergy is a response to food. And so much of our lives revolve around food. It's not just what you're eating to survive. It's our social events. It's going to the high school. It's going to the church. It's going to all these places we socialize around food. And so having someone to go through it with you who really understands, who's willing to get into the weeds with you, who's willing to say, please don't bring her French fries if they're fried in mammal fat, like someone who can do that with you. It really does take a huge load off to have somebody who can help stand up for you.
And I would say probably, I think for me, as hard as it was when I spoke my needs, everything started shifting for me. And it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to ask for help. But it kind of goes in alignment with what Debbie just said. We need support, and we need our support people to really know what we need. Even if you might not know what you need, but if you say, I don't feel well, when you cook bacon, or, hey, like I can't go eat at this restaurant, but can we try this vegan one together? It's hard to do, but I think the more we do it and we're able to practice with our first responder or people that we know are going to be our cheerleader and try things that are new with us, it gets easier.
Yeah, I think I would just add too that so much of why the world is dangerous for people with allergies, for people with alpha-gal syndrome, for people with celiac is this lack of education, this lack of understanding, this lack of awareness. And so that's a huge part of, what we started as 2-alpha-gals and what we're really expanding on with the nonprofit, the Alpha-Gal Foundation, is we want to educate people at the cellular level, right? We want to educate not just our primary circle, like that's really important to have, but we want to educate the servers out there who are preparing food. We want to educate the healthcare practitioners out there. The CDC, that same CDC survey that I quoted a little bit ago, or I referenced a little bit ago, said that 78% of healthcare providers have zero to little knowledge of alpha-gal syndrome at all. 42% had never even heard of it. So we really want to start educating so that we have this ripple effect, so that it isn't that we have to ask one person if they'll go to the vegan restaurant with us, which is what we have to do now, but that people will understand that alpha-gal syndrome is something that's really out there and impacting a huge number of people. And maybe there will be people who say, hey, Debbie can't go to that restaurant. Why don't we try this vegan restaurant? So we want to sort of change the conversation a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like I've been gluten-free since 2012, and I feel like when I first started, it was like I was so alone. Like no one really knew what it was, and restaurants were not great about it, or people would make fun of you, and it was actually like a very lonely place. And now it's definitely gotten a lot better. And of course, there's the people that kind of just do it as like a fad diet or for fun or for diet, and they kind of ruin it for the people that really need to live this way. But it definitely has gotten a lot easier. I feel like restaurants are more aware, starting to know things on the menu that are gluten free, or just have like more understanding and more awareness, and it is getting a lot easier. So I hope that becomes the case for Alpha Gal as well, and that it starts to become more awareness for it and more understanding for it.
Awesome. Yeah, we do too. Thank you. I know I was one of the newbies back in 2008 when I was diagnosed with my wheat allergy, and I'll never forget I went to Wendy's. I asked for something without the bun. I don't remember. And they said, "Oh, are you on the South Beach diet?" And I said, "Unfortunately, no." Like,
you're like, I wish that's all it was.
Right. But it is hard. It's hard. And I think that, like what Debbie was saying, we just really want to drive home the severity, of this for so many people. So
absolutely. Especially if it's the number 10 allergy. That's crazy. I did not know it was that prevalent. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. Plus all the people that don't know that they're dealing with it, right? And they think they're just sensitive to meat, or they don't feel good when they eat meat, and maybe they're not anaphylactic yet, but
that's right.
Hopefully they stay healthy. So
yeah.
Well, Candice, Debbie, thank you so much. This was amazing. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this, but I sure hope that sharing your story and sharing this podcast helps others on their journey, and that, things shift and there starts to be more advocacy and awareness for this critical condition. So thank you so much for sharing everything today.
Thank you so much for having us, Erica, and for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about what we know about alpha-gal syndrome, because I feel like together, and when we have these allergies and these conditions, if we can work together to broadcast this information, it's just making our community safer and safer.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And if people want to find you online and reach out to you and kind of learn a little bit more about the Alpha-Gal Foundation and things like that, go ahead and share some places some links and, pages where people can find you. And I'll also link to it in the show notes as well. So,
okay, awesome. Yeah. So you can find us on all social media platforms at 2 Alpha Gals, and that's TWO Alpha Gals. Our 2 Alpha Gals website is 2alphagals.com. Again, TWO alphagals.com. Our foundation website, so we are the Alpha Gal Foundation, and that's alphagalfoundation.org. And we just started an Instagram page and a Facebook page at Alpha Gal Foundation, but it is in progress.
Awesome. We'll link to it all so people can start following you there too.
Okay. Awesome. And then we also do have a podcast ourselves. So we have In the Tall Grass, and that's on all streaming platforms as well.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, keep up the amazing work, and I definitely look forward to following your journey and hopefully seeing some shifts in this world very soon to help you guys. So
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.